Quake 4 is a direct sequel to Quake 2, which wasn't a sequel to Quake 1, but now it sort of is, and now their universes are all confirmed to be the same one, or some shit like that. You get a little bit of a different experience with each difficulty. However, those games came out in the 90s and Quake 4 came out in the 2000s, and most difficulties since the 2000s have gotten a shitload less creative. So what's the game's difficulty like as it gets harder? Do you get maybe more enemies, faster enemies, tougher enemies that normally encountered late game that appear early game, enemies that don't react to being hit and keep on attacking without being able to be stunned from damage? Yeah, no, you don't get any of that. You will take more damage and enemies will take less damage, but not always because it's inconsistent, except you taking damage. That is very fucking consistent. Okay, not entirely true. There are some other things to take into account too. You have 4 difficulty levels: Private, Corporal, Lieutenant, and General. Or Bitch difficulty, a much better difficulty, and lastly, Settle the fuck down. I say this because if we use Corporal, which makes sense, it's not the easiest, it's not the hardest, and the protagonist is a Corporal. If we use that as the baseline difficulty, then on Private, we receive about 80% of normal damage. On Corporal, we receive 100% as it's the baseline. On Lieutenant, we receive around 170% of normal damage. And on General, we receive around 350% of normal damage. So my question is, what the fuck? In 2005, you'd be crazy if you used keyboard buttons for all the controls instead of a mouse. And if you dared use a laptop touchpad for it, then you would be one sick motherfucker. The first 2 difficulties are virtually identical and I would argue too easy, with Lieutenant being a really good medium level difficulty as it nearly doubles the damage of normal difficulty, where it starts to get hard but not too unbearable, but then General will double the damage again, and now you've got hard for the sake of being hard in the most uncreative ways possible. It goes up in small increments until it reaches General, and then it just shoots straight up. The bottom 2 difficulties are taking the absolute piss, and General just feels sweaty. It's not so much that it's too hard, and you can easily clear levels without even taking damage, it's just not fun, and it's not creative in any way. Clearly there was a time constraint in the development process, because the older games not only use faster enemies, but they also had more enemies and deadlier enemies in early levels. At the very least though, we have mods for that on PC. But not on console, and honestly, fuck using a controller to play this game. There are also a few other lesser known factors that change throughout the difficulty levels aside from player damage and enemy damage, and I can't actually tell if these other things are happening though, because the gameplay still feels virtually identical. These other factors such as enemy aggression, marine buddy health, flagged entities that do or do not spawn based on the difficulty level, minimum health on save game restore, AI never intentionally missing melee attacks, and dynamic protection to stop incremental damage increase on high frequency attacks. The information I've collected started off with just damage gathering right up until I found the SDK documentation. There is a lot of proven and plausible info on there, but I've also had to speculate and assume a lot of things due to the lack of information and resources available. So at this point in time, to my understanding, there is no release source code for Quake 4, but there is source code released for the engine that it runs on, which is idTech 4. All the wikis I've searched have lacked a lot of what this covers as well. So if somebody comes along and tells me, mate, this shit is actually available on this page, I'll just simply go take some fatal IRL fall damage. Once again, as per the documentation, the enemy aggression value reads as Private 1, Corporal 1 to 1.25, Lieutenant 1.25 to 1.5, General 1.5 to 1.75. Two important things to note here are this is not a time delay or cooldown between attacks, and this is like faster enemies, but it's still not faster enemies in the traditional sense, because the enemies will still move at the same speed. They'll spawn in at the same speed, and their animations for attacks and reactions and death are all completely unchanged. They either think slightly faster or are more likely to make a move that is more aggressive. I say this without certainty because these values are only small increases, and to me these aren't that noticeable most of the time. Sometimes I think I notice a difference, and then after looking again it all just looks the same, so I decided to do some side-by-side shots. So I couldn't see any difference, but that was also just me loading a level and cycling through the difficulties using cheat commands. Because some variables are likely to be updated on level load and not live after a console command has been put in, I'm going to actually go back and replay the game and use 2 different save slots for each difficulty that I'm comparing. Now I'll go back into the area I was in before, but while using 2 different saves for both difficulties. Ideally I'd compare all 4 of the difficulties, but if we don't see anything significant between the easiest and the hardest difficulty, then we definitely won't see anything on the middle difficulties in between. Okay, now it seems there's a little bit more of a difference between them, however minimal it is, and until likely the later levels when the areas become more crowded, the one-on-one and small group fights are easily destroyed and look pretty much the same every time. It also looks like the enemies are faster on private, but more strategic on general, but the distance from enemies in RNG will change their behaviour without difficulty being related, so you will see them do both of those behaviours on private, corporal, lieutenant and general, and not one or the other. It's also possible that the enemy behaviour would be affected by their order of attacks or even their chain of attacks, how often that they will use certain attacks. How quickly they recover doesn't seem to be affected, but I know that the wind-up attacks for some of the enemies is less. For example, we can see the Gladiator's railgun was actually faster on general. Your AI squad mates also happen to not be invincible. Their HP is affected by difficulty, but surprisingly not in the way that you would expect. Their health will increase and be marginally higher on the harder difficulties than they do on the lower difficulties, but that doesn't make it easier because let's not forget that the enemies are also stronger, they do more damage to the player and they have a higher amount of progression. So on private difficulty, they get 120% of their normal health pool. On corporal, they get their standard 100%. On lieutenant, they get 120%, and on general, they get 140%. The health differences are quite subtle, but as the player becomes significantly weaker to damage, it allows the Marines to probably take an extra hit or 2 depending on the type of damage that they've received before they die, which isn't much, but at least they aren't weaker as the difficulty levels go up, because on their own, on easy difficulty, they are really good at fucking dying. This would also mean that the squad mate's HP is different to the player, which, no shit, but if they got a 40% HP boost on general difficulty compared to corporal, and they also had the damage received increase as the player on that difficulty, that would be completely fucking pointless. Marine AI is unchanged, so even though they aren't made smarter or more aware of their surroundings as you go up in difficulty, they also are not made any dumber. Because Hollenbeck, after you come up to the elevator when returning to the data storage terminal, will get dropped by 2 berserkers if you don't intervene, and he's supposed to be a fucking lieutenant. Sledge also can be one hit when you're in the data processing tower by a berserker if you're not paying attention as well. Ordinarily, when it comes to the damage the player receives, melee damage is excluded from the normal damage scaling. And of course, your squad mates are no exception. Whether on the easiest or hardest difficulty, Marines will normally die in the same number of hits. Some Marines can take more damage than others, so the same number of hits applies to the individual. Also keep in mind that their health condition at the time and the enemy hitting them does make a difference though, and it can make them look artificially stronger or weaker. The first two Marines you encounter that you're in a firefight with at the start of the game, for example, if hit by a grunt, Webb will always get 2 shot and D's will always get 3 shot from the melee attacks, and that's throughout all the difficulties, as you can see. Mission critical NPCs, such as any member of Rhino Squad, have health regeneration, so if they don't take too much damage too soon, they will just regenerate until they're at full HP again. Non-mission critical NPCs don't have this, so if they survive a lot of damage, they might only be 1 stray projectile from death. Some Marines, such as Corporal Mauler, have a seemingly infinite amount of HP and can be considered mission critical, but he either cannot be killed at all, or he can take that much damage that it would not be possible to kill him playing through the game normally. Much like the player, melee damage is typically what it comes down to when squad mates get killed, so their all-round health boosts would only benefit the ranged projectile damage. It's no surprise that you take more damage on a higher difficulty, and it's even less surprising that enemies can take more damage before they die as well. On Private, enemies' HP is 70%, on Corporal it is 100%, on Lieutenant it is 140%, and on General it is 180%. The enemy HP increase is a lot less bloated than the damage increase to enemies by the player, which is a really well balanced mechanic because they're fun to shoot and drop to the floor. They're not fun to shoot a shitload of times and become bullet sponges while they're fucking shooting and smacking you the whole time. Because enemy headshots do more damage than regular body shots, and explosive weapons and shotguns do damage to enemies differently depending on how far they are from the blast, sometimes it can create an inconsistency where they seem a little bit stronger or weaker at different occasions. I won't bother going through and testing out every single weapon on every single enemy. I'm not even going to do that for all the damage either, for obvious fucking reasons. But the difference varies from minor to significant, because the way the weapons are designed and balanced with damage means that using the railgun would be less logical on an enemy than using a shotgun or assault rifle. And enemies also stagger more because they can receive heavy hitting shots without being killed in one hit. So weapons like the rocket, shotgun, railgun are now temporarily stunning enemies on general difficulty where they would normally die from that shot on private.
All right. Kane's the only one who's uninjured, so he's going with you. Uninjured?
So we know the enemy damage gets ramped up massively on general, but there are so many ways that you can hurt and kill yourself in this game as well. I decided to grab data as much as I could to see how it compares by difficulty. Some of the self-destructive ways of taking damage or dying include fall damage, fully charging a blaster and discharging it at a wall, being in close proximity to an object when shooting a nail gun, standing nearby to explosives such as grenades or rockets, being within the radius of the dark matter gun, stepping into fire, or even standing underneath acid sprayers. So how much worse is General? Well, you take so much damage you can't even handle the impact on landing from jumping, nor the friction of being injected to be healed.
Well, shit. You're not dead.
Here, let me heal you.
HQ, come on.
What are you doing wasting my time?
At the start of the video, I initially referred to most of the damage as percentages, such as 350% instead of 3.5 times, when I was comparing general difficulty to corporal. It's the same fucking thing, but I'm going to simplify it to multiplication instead of using percentages. For example, the blaster damage on general is about 3.89 times the normal damage on corporal if you raw dog it without armor. It's 4.6 times the damage of corporal when you're having armor equipped, but the armor reduces the damage to 4.6 times 5 instead of 3.89 times 18. So I'm not going to comment on the armor absorption rate, but holy shit, it puts in work with some of these weapons. Also, keep in mind, it's not rounded to the perfect decimal either. And to no surprise at all, full armor is fucking useless if you sit on a grenade or rocket launcher, which is nice and realistic, I would say. Good thing those are very easy to dodge. Grenades, rockets, nails, and the dark matter cores all have a radius-based damage, so if you're really close to them but not on top of them, you'll receive varying amounts of damage that will change slightly the further you are away until you take no damage at all. For all of those weapons except the nails from the nail gun, I found even on general, if I was at the very edge of the radius of the impact, I could take as little as 1 damage for all of them. All damage is rounded to the nearest whole numbers, such as 0.5 going to 1, though I'm pretty sure I managed to not even lose 1 HP, but the player reacted to being hit like I did take damage while I stayed at 100 HP. I presume that is because I managed to take as little as 0.1 to 0.4 damage, and it rounded downwards to 0. For the nail gun, rocket, and dark matter gun, I also managed to take 1 point of health consistently at the edge of the radius, but not take any armor damage at all, which is extremely rare and difficult to do. Even better, it's also a waste of fucking time lining yourself up for 10 minutes, seeing how little you can take on each difficulty. The damage you receive is also flat, whether received by yourself or enemies. So if you took the same hit, unless your distance from a projectile impact or explosion was further away than the one before it, you will always take the same amount of damage. Some enemies will switch between certain attacks that sometimes do the same damage and sometimes do different damage, but it's usually one of the two that you receive, and both of those attacks can deal either amount. So if an enemy does a lighter attack animation, it can do the equal or same amount of damage as a heavier attack animation, because those damage values are not tied to either of those animations. So my guess is it's calculating two hard-coded damage values to the various melee animations that they do. So sometimes you might get lucky and be able to take an extra hit or two. Other times you could get completely fucked, and it doesn't matter what animation that they're doing, because you can still receive one or the other. Distance from an attack, so being just skimmed lightly or being on an angle where they couldn't have done a full hit on you, doesn't seem to make a difference either. You can still get shat on. Despite all the modifications made to Kane during Strogification, he takes the same amount of damage but has 25 HP and 25 armor extra. I mean, he is faster, but he also looks like shit. One could argue out of context and say that post-op doesn't change anything significant, you're now just a lot more ugly. That is strictly in the context of Strogification, of course.
Kane, you are trying my patience.
There are difficulty level flags mentioned in the documentation that refer to entities that are unspecified not spawning in depending on difficulty. This will likely refer to certain enemies or items not spawning in depending on the difficulty. That being said, I won't bother going into it because it would have rarely been used in this game, if at all, and I've played through enough sections that I've memorized enemy spawns, and it has been the exact same throughout each difficulty. If it was to take place, it would likely be from an enemy spawner such as a teleporter, a boss that spawns enemies such as Voss or Nexus, or even the medic teleport dropper enemy that you also find in the game. If you get to a low amount of health and you are far from a checkpoint or finishing the level, chances are you're going to have a shit time trying not to cop a single shot, because if you do, you will probably die. Because of this, the game has mitigated getting yourself stuck without enough HP to prevent any softlock. Though there are no points in the game with unavoidable damage, and even the worst of enemy encounters can be completed without taking damage, this is still done for your own sake. Keep in mind, this restores only your HP, not your armor. On private, loading a level will boost it to 20 if it's below, whether you're alive or dead, and restarting the level will boost it to 25. On corporal, loading a level will boost it to 10 if it's below, whether alive or dead, and restarting will boost it to 25 as well. On lieutenant and general, loading level will not boost your HP, so if you're at 1 HP, it will stay at 1 HP. Same with restarting the level. Not that it would make any fucking difference anyway. If an existing map start doesn't already exist, it will create one based on the difficulty of the game upon its creation. Or it will load the pre-existing map start and the HP and restoration will be based on that map start's difficulty. So if you die on general and an existing map start exists on corporal difficulty, it will then just load the corporal difficulty one. So in theory, if you deleted the map start when playing general and chose to restart the level on a pre-existing map start, the game will change the difficulty on you with or without you realizing, but you'd have to be really stupid to do that. And honestly, if you got to that point on private or corporal where you have that little HP that kicks in, you probably deserve to be in that situation. The AI never intentionally missing melee attacks on general for the most part is true. You can still comfortably dodge a lot of their attacks and they will still miss by just being retards. Though you don't want to play that game because if they do hit you just that one time, you will probably get one hit. The Berserker's electric AoE ground slam attack can easily do over 300 damage to if you stand in it long enough, which means on general you only have to stand in it for about a second or two. Dynamic protection, which is enabled for all difficulties except general, is implemented to ensure that if multiple enemies are shooting you at once, it will downscale some of the damage when you're fighting them so that you can avoid getting a cheap death from a bunch of unlucky time shots at once. This is completely disabled on general, so if you come out of cover at the wrong time, you can easily cop the full amount from several enemies if they happen to be shooting in your direction. This, however, does not apply to fights one-on-one, so don't expect a tough solo enemy or boss to do less damage on consecutive attacks in a very short time on easier difficulties either. So this begs the question, what the hell do I do with all this information? Well, let me answer that for you. Very simple.